From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris Polo. Colombians are rejecting the proposed neoliberal reforms of President Ivan Duque as demonstrations enter their 9th day. Protests continued into the night throughout the country. A national strike is ongoing, with many social sectors throwing their weight behind the mobilizations. The measures introduced by the Duque administration would privatize basic services and directly prejudice the poorest in Colombia. Citizens also condemned the government's failure to implement the 2016 peace agreements and the killing of social leaders throughout the country. The Indigenous Guard from the Department of Cauca have joined the protests in the capital, Bogota. The leaders of several indigenous communities have said they're joining the strike to reject the new economic measures, state crimes like the murder of Dylan Cruz and the killing of 8 children in a bombing in Caqueta. Meanwhile, an autopsy report in Colombia says the young protester who died on Monday was killed with a 12-bore shotgun. The death of 18-year-old Dylan Cruz has been at the center of protests since he was shot by riot police at a demonstration last Saturday. He died in hospital 2 days later. The autopsy says he suffered severe head wounds as a result of a direct hit with shotgun pellets. Social movements are demanding those responsible for his death be brought to justice. Now, Bolivia's Legislative Assembly has approved the regulations for the election of members of a new Supreme Electoral Court. This was one of the steps agreed on Sunday when the de facto president, Janine Áñez, signed off on an electoral law agreed by the Assembly. The regulations were passed by over 2/3 of the lawmakers, including those of Evo Morales' Mas Party. The members of the Electoral Court must be in place within 20 days, and they will then call fresh elections, probably for April or May next year. The former Speaker of the Senate, Adriana Salvatierra, insisted the measure must go hand in hand with the investigation of human rights abuses following the coup against President Morales.
We repeat very emphatically that we all believe the solution to the conflict should be peaceful and democratic, but it cannot ignore the calls for justice or forget the dead and injured. It will not be possible to celebrate democracy if there is no justice, if there are no constitutional guarantees and full respect for human rights. Social peace does not come from just democracy, but fundamentally from justice and ethics. As lawmakers, we cannot be compliant or silent, or forget the pain that the Bolivian people are feeling.
And while political agreements make progress in Bolivia, the persecution of social and political leaders tied to the government of President Evo Morales continues. Daisy Choque, the former Movement Towards Socialism candidate for Montero, is being held in pretrial detention accused of murder, criminal association, and incitement. She was arrested while giving an interview at her home. Her lawyer says she's a political prisoner. Choque's detention comes amid numerous denunciations of human rights abuses committed by the de facto authorities following the right-wing coup after October 20th elections. The Bolivian Ombudsman's office has confirmed the death of Calixto Wanacu Aguilar, who was shot in the head by forces of repression earlier this month. Wanacu Aguilar died at hospital, becoming the 10th person to succumb to injuries incurred in the Sencata massacre on November 19th during a military and police operation against demonstrators blocking access to a fuel depot near the city of El Alto. The president of the delegation sent by Mercosur to investigate human rights abuses in Bolivia, Cecilia Merchan, has said the killing of anti-coup protesters must be recognized if the country is to find a solution to the crisis.
There have been grave human rights abuses in Bolivia. We believe that there is a moment in which the Bolivian people are going to have to try and escape this situation, and that's something that's being argued over. An electoral calendar is something fundamental to the reconstruction. Democracy is central to this. Something else that is crucial to a democratic solution is the recognition of what has happened during this time. There has to be recognition of those killed, the 1,000 prisoners, many without reason, and also those who are exiled in embassies here and that can't leave because the government won't let them.
Earlier, we spoke with Bolivian political analyst Nicolás Melendres. We asked him what he thinks of the full restoration of diplomatic relations with the U.S. for the first time since 2009.
The ambassador of Janine Áñez, named in a special mission to the United States, it's really warning for people here in Bolivia, because one of the first countries to recognize the government of Janine Áñez is the United States of America. So this is really, it's kind of strange for people here in Bolivia after maybe more than 10 years with no official relations with the United States. In fact, what we have with the United States was a good economic relation in these 13 years, but now it seems that some political interest starts to going to be seen in the next days.
Shifting gears now, Peru is putting up its own candidate for Secretary General of the Organization of American States to stand against the incumbent, Luis Almagro. Hugo de Zela Martinez is a former vice foreign minister and Peru's current ambassador to the OAS. His candidacy indicates splits within the Lima group, which Almagro helped to set up to press for regime change in Venezuela. The former president of the UN General Assembly, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, who was Ecuador's foreign minister under Rafael Correa, has also confirmed she will stand. Dominica's Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett has condemned an Al Jazeera documentary alleging the sale of diplomatic passports, labeling it a conspiracy created by the opposition. He says the false claims have been shared by the United Workers' Party for years and threatened legal action for defamation.
It was clear to me, as it will be to you, that either Linton, the UWP directly, or their foreign collaborators provided this business information to Al Jazeera for political reasons. People who libel me will find themselves before the courts.
Coming up, Daniel Martinez concedes defeat in the Uruguayan elections. Don't go anywhere. We'll have more when you come back.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen. Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Citizens in Chile are highlighting injuries caused by police violence during the protests against the neoliberal administration of President Sebastián Piñera. Demonstrators on Thursday condemned the high number of eye injuries caused by the police firing rubber bullets at protesters. At least 232 people have been hospitalized with serious eye injuries, a figure that is disproportionately high by international standards. It has raised concerns of deliberate malpractice on the part of security forces. At least 24 people have been killed during the demonstrations.
How has President Piñera responded to our demands? With more repression. Today in Chile, defending the right to decent pensions and wage for everyone means you lose an eye. If you go out to protest, you risk being raped, tortured, or the loss of your eyes.
Leaders of the Social Unity Platform, which has been coordinating many of the protests in Chile, have been meeting with the government. Our correspondent Leonel Retamal reports.
We're outside the Moneda presidential palace, where a meeting has just taken place between trade unionists of the Social Unity Platform and the government. One of the teachers' leaders is just explaining to some of his members what happened at the meeting, the demands put forward by the unions, not just teachers, but construction workers, dockers and other unions that make up the CUT Confederation. These are the unions that have been leading many of the protests in Chile, most recently the general strike on Tuesday this week. They say the government was prepared to listen to them, but there has been no concrete response to their demands, nor was an agenda of talks agreed. Nonetheless, this is the first such meeting between the government and the organizations that have been mobilizing after more than 40 days of the uprising. They say they raised the issue of human rights abuses, the 280 or so cases of eye injuries, the 2,600 formal complaints registered for violations of human rights. They talked about their 10-point list of social demands, including an increase in the minimum wage and the issues of pensions, education, healthcare and others. And also the question of a constitutional referendum in April. They want the government to suspend its legislative plans, which the protesters say do not correspond to their demands, but just deepen the existing neoliberal policies.
That was our correspondent Leonel Retama with that report. The candidate of the governing Broad Front in Uruguay has conceded defeat in last Sunday's presidential election. In a tweet, Daniel Martinez said the counting of special votes had not changed the tendency shown on Sunday night. He was therefore congratulating Luis Lacalle Pou as president-elect. He said he would meet his rival on Friday. Sunday's results gave the right-wing Lacalle a lead of less than 30,000 votes, which meant no official result was possible until the special votes were counted. Small groups of Lacalle's supporters gathered to celebrate his victory in Montevideo. The right-wing leader has already been congratulated by the Venezuelan opposition figure Juan Guaidó, and he in turn expressed his support for Guaidó. Moving on to Brazil, the persecution by the far-right government against landless campesinos is growing. Stopping the agrarian reform evictions and plans to criminalize rural workers are raising concerns among social movements.
The Brazilian constitution says that the state-owned lands need to be prioritized for our agrarian reform. 4 years ago, a public area in the city of Paraná, where a company was illegally located, was occupied by the landless workers movement, making way for the Maria Rosa do Concertado camp. Negotiations for the concession of a new space for families were underway, but the parliament coup changed the situation.
Polls indicated that if Lula went to prison, Bolsonaro would win the presidency. I think he sums up the worst things that a human being can be. He's a person who is not prepared to be in such a position. Seeing his victory in the wings, the Dodge owners of Castrolanda wanted to tear up the contract because they knew they'd have support from this neo-fascist group.
Today, the 200 families in the camp are at risk of eviction. Under the complexity of the government with the agribusiness, the fate of the landless movement could be lost on the sides of the roads or among the homeless in the larger cities.
If the eviction is carried out, our families will have to go to other camps to avoid living on the street. At this juncture, with this government, we are in danger. We are resisting with these families.
Meanwhile, Bolsonaro is preparing a bill that would allow an action to protect against the invasion of private property. He also plans to authorize federal intervention in land evictions.
We have medicines, penicillin, migraine remedies, sweet potato that is excellent for high blood pressure, and many things that save us from spending in the pharmacy as we earn so little.
In the last week, 2 evictions took place in the landless camps located in the northeast of the country. In Paraná, one of the modern cities for the consolidation of the agrarian reform, 8 evictions have already been registered. In the capital of the state, the MST played a fundamental role in campaigning for the freedom of former President Lula.
The attacks on MST camps and the evictions in Paraná clearly seek to wear down the movement and to give it a bad name for the support that it gave to the Lula Libre vigil. The MST was part of the vigil. That's part of their project.
The development model based on the use of agroecology for the production of food, as opposed to using agrotoxin, has earned the landless movement the support of various sectors of the Brazilian society.
Sudan's transitional authorities have approved a law to dissolve the former ruling party and repealed a public order used to regulate women's behavior under ousted President Omar al-Bashir. Following a 14-hour marathon meeting, Sudan's Sovereign Council and Cabinet voted to dissolve Bashir's National Congress Party, making way for its assets to be seized. This will be a crucial test of how far transitional authorities will go to overturn nearly 3 decades of rule following the 1989 coup. The 2 measures respond to key demands by a protest movement that helped overthrow Bashir in April.
The first law simply cancels all the laws pertaining to the public order, which we all know have an impact on every family or most families in Sudan, especially the ones belonging to certain social classes, who are harmed more than others because of the implementation of these laws. The second law, and the most important one, is in accordance with the constitutional document, which aims to rebuild the Sudanese state by dismantling the June 30 regime and ending the empowerment of the regime. This law directly dissolves the National Congress Party, as well as confiscating all assets and money owned by the party and all the institutions belonging to it. These assets will be under the control of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning.
The president of Guinea-Bissau, José Mario Vaz, has accepted defeat in the presidential election held on Sunday. Running as an independent, Vaz came in 4th place. He made history as the first democratically elected president to survive a full 5-year term since the country gained independence from Portugal in 1974. A runoff is expected to take place on December 29th between former Prime Ministers Domingos Simoe Pereira and Umaro Sissoko Embalo, competing for the top job.
It is with a clear conscience that I will leave my country. I will live in peace, because during my mandate, I never killed anyone, never took anything from anyone, never lied, never tortured, never violated anyone's rights. I have done my duty as President of the Republic.
After the break, we take a look at the global climate strike beginning in Australia. Stick around.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en él.
Dot in the eye. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Protesters around the world are demanding radical action to combat climate change. A global strike began in Australia ahead of the COP25 United Nations Climate Conference in Madrid. Australia's government lacks a coherent climate policy and is one of the countries already being affected by man-made climate change with extreme heat, severe weather, and the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef. There are currently 150 uncontrolled bushfires burning in the country. The Sydney demonstration was one of the first to take place today.
The time to take action. Now is the time to show our bosses and to show our politicians that we have the power to shut down the system. We have the power to make the decisions about what gets built, about how our energy is produced, and about what society we want to live in.
Now, the COP25 summit begins in Spain on Monday, December 2nd, and activists are preparing for the arrival of delegates from around the world. Greenpeace activists in Madrid hung banners on buildings highlighting corporate interests and consumerism's adverse effects on the battle against climate change. They said Black Friday, Black World in reference to the now infamous day of sales. Lebanese citizens continue taking to the streets for protests against capital controls taken by the Lebanese banks. The government of Lebanon has imposed unprecedented capital controls. In the face of the measures, angry protesters destroyed the fence outside the central bank, while others called for authorities to be held accountable for the deterioration of the Lebanese currency. Finance ministry officials have said they are trying to pacify concerns of a possible first-ever default on the country's debt amid the worst financial crisis in 3 decades. Well, political stagnation in Lebanon has worsened the economic situation as violent confrontations grow between groups in favor of the current president, Michel Aoun, and the opposition. Our correspondent, Leonid Cruz, informs us.
Lebanon remains in a political statement without a clear option for the formation of a government that can cope with the economic situations and meet the demands of the citizens. President Michael announced that the parliamentary consultations for the election of a new prime minister would begin this week, but these were cancelled after Safaf Aridi announced that he would resign his candidacy for the post of the prime minister, disagreeing with the formation of a government in which traditional politicians would participate. This difference in contradictions translated into violent confrontations of the streets. According to the Lebanese Army and Red Cross, dozens of wounded had been reported so far, including several hospitalized, while 6 people were arrested for participating or incited these disturbances. This political paralysis has also further harmed the economy. On the other hand, several organizations suspended the strike that was scheduled to go from Thursday until November the 30th, at the request of the private companies who hope to undo some of the damage that the massive protests have done to the earnings. The Association of Banks also plans to meet next week to define next steps, especially now that they face several charges following the restrictive measures in recent weeks.
That was our correspondent Leonid Cruz with that report. Hong Kong police have seized more than 4,000 petrol bombs during their siege of the Polytechnic University. The operation came 2 weeks after violent protesters occupied the campus.
Now the focus is mainly of the handling of the dangerous stuff, items, offensive weapons, and also to gather evidence. And our major concern is not about the arrest, but the well-being of people, if there are any, still remain inside. Yes, their personal safety, their well-being will be our concern.
And China's foreign ministry spokesperson says unwelcomed people will not be allowed entry into the country. His comment comes amidst reports that the People's Republic is considering placing all the U.S. lawmakers who drafted the Hong Kong law on a no-entry list.
All I can tell you is our principal position. That is, the issue of visas comes under the sovereignty of a country. The Chinese government has, of course, the right to decide who is allowed to enter on its territory and who is not. Those who are not welcome will naturally not be allowed to enter.
Iramzi Peraza, our correspondent in Beijing, has more.
China has said they will retaliate in kind against the United States following the approval by President Donald Trump of a law that supports violent riots in Hong Kong. Through an official statement, the Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry described the approval of this law as an act that violates international law and an act of interference, calling it an absolute abomination. Although no details were given in regards to the countermeasures and reprisals, that authorities agreed that the law has hidden intentions, as it has nothing to do with human rights or democracy and ignorance all the needless violence even taking place in Hong Kong. Nonetheless, the United States has continued to support the radical protesters who have sown chaos and instability, and who have also attacked civilians and innocent bystanders during these past 6 months. The U.S. law that was approved this week calls for an annual evaluation of Hong Kong's autonomy and pretends to impose sanctions if the results are unfavorable. But China said this is a new mechanism to promote sanctions and also to interference in China's internal affairs. Meanwhile, experts agree it is necessary to wait for the effects of this law to be apparent before trying to end the trade war initiated by Washington.
And we end with news that on Thursday, Telesur was awarded the 2019 German Prize of Journalism Walter Reuter. Among 300 contestants, Telesur took first place in the radio and television category thanks to the work done over the past year to cover the massive migration of Central Americans to the United States. And that brings us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.
Who's moving the chessmen?